Now from Istanbul is Jasmine EL-GAMAL, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Middle East advisor at the US Defence Department. Jasmine, thanks for your time. With Syrian troops looking set for a direct confrontation with Turkish-led forces in the region, what are the odds of this situation deepening into a wider regional conflict?
It's definitely a danger. I think that because both sides understand the really serious ramifications of such an escalation, I think that there might be a bit more care taken by both sides not to engage in a direct confrontation between Syrian troops and Turkish troops. I think this is where you might see the Russians getting involved and exercising a bit of diplomacy between the Turks and the Syrians. I think the more likely scenario probably would be the SDF continuing to push back against the Kurdish incursion, supported maybe by the Syrians. But I see maybe both sides, Turkey and Syria, taking a bit of care to stay out of each other's way for now.
As you mentioned there, Russia is clearly becoming a key player and certainly appears to be the one to mediate in this conflict.
Right. I mean, the U.S. has shown a complete lack of ability to act as any sort of a moderator or a mediator because their policy has been so erratic. As you mentioned in your backgrounder, we have, on one hand, pulled out of Syria, giving a complete green light to the Turks to enter into the northeast, while at the same time we're putting sanctions on the Turks. But as Nancy Pelosi said, the sanctions seem to be a bit too little too late. It's not actually clear what the U.S. objective is. And so it's not well positioned to act as a mediator, although it should be doing that. It is a more natural role for us to play given our relationship with the Turks and with the SDF. But unfortunately, it seems that in the lack of any sort of willpower or ability of the U.S. to mediate, the Russians have stepped in. And I should also add that the Europeans have been also, unfortunately, completely absent in all of this.
So as a result, does this truly signal the end of American influence in the region?
It looks like it. I mean, you wonder whether it's reversible. You wonder whether the U.S. will realize the damage that's being done by the absence of U.S. leadership in the region. Unfortunately, you have a president that has said time and time again from the very beginning of his presidential campaign that he is not interested in engaging in the region. He wants others to take responsibility, whether that's financially or militarily. So is it the end of U.S. leadership? Unfortunately, it's looking like that right now. I just don't know if it's reversible in the future.
But as a result,
I would say temporarily.
But as a result, we're witnessing a vacuum in which, Russia and Iran are stepping into the position. And certainly we've seen the sort of relationship develop over the last few months or year or so with those Astana talks between Russia, Iran and Turkey. So do you think there could be a situation where maybe the conflict could be brought to an end with the involvement of those two other powers?
It depends. It really depends on what we see over the next week or two to see just how far the Turks are going to go in Syria, just how far this operation will go. Already, it's gone way past what they initially said they were going to do. So it really depends on the dynamics between the Turks, between the Syrians, now that the Syrians are re-establishing their presence in the northeast. And then depending on what the SDF does between now and the end of the Turkish incursion, whenever that might be. I think there are still a lot of unknowns, but the biggest dynamic that'll affect whether or not there is a settlement anytime soon is this dynamic to watch out for between the Turks and the Syrians and the extent to which the Russians will be able to mediate an end to the conflict.
Just finally, I'm just curious to know, you're in Istanbul at the moment, just how much support from within Turkey does Erdogan have for this offensive?
It obviously depends on who you ask, but there is a huge sense of frustration, I think, in Turkey about the situation with the refugees. You know, the Turks are starting to feel a little bit burdened. The government rhetoric and the anti-refugee rhetoric certainly doesn't help. And when it comes to the YPG, obviously, and the PKK, there is quite a bit of support for Erdogan's assertion that this is a problem that has to be solved once and for all, that Turkey does have a legitimate security threat on its border, and that he is taking care of that on behalf of Turkey, on behalf of Turks. I think that rhetoric resonates with quite a few people.
Jasmine EL-GAMAL, thank you so much.